This is the Sports Content Gameplan, the podcast where we go behind the scenes with the creators shaping how we see sports today. I'm your host, Isaac Solina, and each week I have conversations with the people behind the videos, photos, stories, and strategies that brings the game to life. We talk creativity, storytelling, and the real work that happens behind every highlight. In today's episode, I'm joined by Daniel Smith, expert in sports marketing, communications, and content at Born23. We talk about his 18-year journey in the sports creative field, working multiple Olympics, and starting his own agency, plus much more. Let's get into it. Daniel, welcome to the Game Plan.
Thank you very much for having me.
How are you doing today?
Doing very well. Just over in just outside of London, here in the UK. Just working out of my home this morning before I head into my new little office that I've established just about 15 minutes away from the house, which is quite nice.
Nice. And we'll get into your new endeavors also, and I'm excited for this episode because I get to talk about some other sports that I have no personal relationship to, so it's going to be fun to learn about other experiences in working with communications and content in sports that I don't know so much about.
Yeah, we'll dive into it, but I've got a lot of experience over the years from working in cricket. It was one of the first sports I entered, from spending 11 years working at World Sailing, the International Federation of the sport, to Motorsport UK, working across the British Grand Prix, and more recently establishing my own business, which is Born23, specializing in marketing, comms, and content, knitting the trio together and connecting it to organizational business strategy. So it's been a great career to date, and I'm looking forward to the journey that's next.
Amazing. We'll start by a few quick questions before we get into it. Do you have a favorite social media?
My favorite social media in terms of an account is probably LinkedIn. I love LinkedIn at the moment. It's actually how we first connected. And certainly since I've become a business owner, it's become a great way to actually connect and network much faster than being in a room. I find the content in there quite educational as well. I'm learning from the people that I'm following. I'm not just following people for the sake of it. I'm following people to follow their journeys, because there's so much that I can learn and understand from them. But then in terms of, the sort of aspirational, exciting content, then for me it's Instagram at the moment. It's where I go for just to have fun on social media, just to see what's happening in certain spaces. And that's my favorite right now.
And do you have a favorite type of content?
Educational. So anything where I can learn something from it, I think is quite important for me. I like to, as I kind of mentioned about why I use LinkedIn, I always like to learn. I always like to see what's next. I always like to improve myself personally. And I'm always looking for ways in which, whether that's best practice for the workplace, or best practice in life in general, that sort of trend of education I really enjoy. But when it comes to the more sporting side of things, there are some things that I like the immediacy of live sport. I've always been a big fan of live clipping, getting out in near real time. I'm a father of two. I don't have the time to sit and watch a match in full that often. So when I'm on the go, I like to hop on. I like to see, once I've got that alert on my WhatsApp or on my apps or whatever it might be, I actually want to see the goal, the finish, the moment that in time that so I can celebrate with, almost as if the fans that are there. And then it's also going behind the scenes, understanding people, understanding, people's stories. Content for me, is very much sort of presenter and people led at the moment, and really kind of opening the doors to lives and showing people behind the scenes of what's going on. So that's my sort of personal consumption, and that does often also translate into some of the content that I create and produce across various clients that I've got at the moment, but then also historically as well when I've been within rights holders.
Today, do you have any creators that you are inspired by?
Oh, that's a really good question. There are loads. There are loads that I
Of
follow.
course.
The ones that I'm intrigued by at the moment is there's a lot of sort of Gen Z, giving it a go, building audiences, and that's something that actually fascinates me in many ways because the quite young people, certainly this is kind of within the motorsport world, but they're building audiences of like five figures, 50,000, which for a 16, 17, 18-year old creator is quite astonishing. Um, but they're able to do it because they're connecting with the people around their same ages. So I've worked with a few creators like that because they know how to connect to that community, and I feel it's important that you sort of embrace them and work closely with them. There's so many within UK motorsport at the moment who are really going into the paddock of all different events. It's not just Formula One, it is the sort of grassroots of UK motorsport, and really kind of connecting with the paddock community that's there, and then translating that into their content to reach tens of thousands of people. And 10 years ago, these events that they're going to, they never really had the awareness or reach. They were almost kind of behind closed doors. Few people go up to a circuit, watch, but now these creators are opening the doors to events and moments in the sport that have never been known before. And that's something that I found quite intriguing and exciting. And those are the sort of creators at the moment that I'm learning a lot from, and also working with.
Agree. And maybe we'll get back to it later also, these new content creators. Do you have like a best or your favorite DM you have ever received?
Uh, um, it's a funny question. The reason I laugh is because when I was at World Sailing, I always used to encourage my the social media manager there to slide into the DMs. So whenever we wanted something from a competitor or anyone like that, it's like, oh, how are we going to speak to them? I was like, Liz, just slide in their DMs. And then you'd get the notification that they've replied. And it's like, oh, Liz is in the DMs again with all of these sailors. So that I wouldn't say there's one that I can necessarily pick out directly, but it's just the when slide in the DMs became a thing, it became quite comical because it was just a great way to reach people, and that's what I like about social. It's the immediacy of being able to connect and build relationships. Years gone by, you to try and get hold of talent was incredibly hard. You have to go through layers, you have to go through agents, you have to go through people. But I feel as if, certainly with regards to the creators and the athletes, they are very in tune into what their responsibilities are on the platforms. So when they're seeing comments and when they're engaging with their own personal fans, they understand that there is a responsibility in many respects to engage, to reply, to respond, and also to support. I mean, you see this quite often in football where a young boy, girl will be going to a game for the first time with their mum or dad. They reach out to famous footballer, hey, great to see you score today. The footballer will see it and be like, oh, thanks for coming down. I'm going to send you a pair of my, signed boot, or a signed shirt or something like that. I've kind of gone around your question as to my own personal DMs. Obviously, I've got that little anecdote, but I do feel people kind of see that responsibility with using it for like bigger purposes than direct messaging.
And when you create great content today, how would you describe that content in 3 words?
Aspirational, informative, creative. And I can
Nice.
dive I can dive into those. Aspirational in the sense of, I'll talk about this sh- later on, I'm sure, but aspirational in the sense of making the previously unseen seen, bringing things to life and showcasing them. Um, Creative in the sense of don't worry about boundaries, kind of spread your wings. Um, you know, Trial and learn. Some things may work, some things may not, and I think that's okay to do that trial and error. And then the sort of educational, informative side of things, telling people things they don't necessarily know, giving them things that hook them into your story and reel them in and get them to understand what's going on and get them to engage in what you're doing.
My journey started back like in journalism, or I studied journalism, but then I started working with my own basketball club's communications website, and from that it just like it's been this career in communications and digital marketing and digital content. How did your journey start?
Yeah, so I studied sports journalism at university from '06 to '09. And I started specializing in the print side of things, and digital. So I kind of grew up in the era where Facebook was just a social media platform that you could just connect between students in your university. I remember in the lectures and in the digital modules of my course, learning Twitter. I think we were in the first kind of cohort of people that had a Twitter account, and kind of calling it microblogging at the time. MySpace was still around, and perhaps even Bebo as well, which are two of my favorite platforms. So I really I learnt the ropes earlier on, and also saw the opportunities that arose. Again, the practical skills at university as well. From the writing perspective, I know how to craft a story. From a digital content perspective, I know how to use the Adobe suite and so forth. And then that kind of gave me a really good platform to take into the industry. So I did a few placements, working across multiple sports during my studies. So from working at the European Badminton Championships in Liverpool to the Henley Royal Regatta to British Universities and Colleges Championships, Paralympic World Cup in the lead up to London 2012. So I kind of had a really good practical hands-on experience, which is what I would encourage any student to do nowadays, is to make sure you're doing the course, but go out there, get the practical knowledge and learn from people who are doing it day in, day out. I spent the season at Surrey County Cricket Club, and I was, the in-house journalist. I was writing previews, day reports from all of the games, and alongside that, I was responsible for producing the Surrey TV highlights with the BBC broadcaster Mark Church. He and I were on the road, all season long, creating those materials. And I don't even think they had a Facebook at the time, but then we created one, and it was like 3,000 people. But giving them the content, giving them the highlights, and getting them to engage with it. So I learned a lot of sort of practical video editing skills. I improved my sort of Photoshop skills, etc., etc. So I kind of I had that grounding in how to create and how to use these tools. From there, I then spent best part of 11 years working at what was the International Sailing Federation to what became World Sailing. In about 2016, I went in at a sort of coordinator level, and then within my last sort of 4 years at the organization, I was the director of communications and digital. And that was a wide ranging role, responsible for comms, responsible for the website, the digital side of things, social media, media relations, and broadcast of the World Championships, the World Cup, supporting the commercial team with the right products that they in turn could sell. So I kind of migrated from being on the tools, shall we say, to being more sort of strategic, which is where I'd say my strength lies nowadays. Days. But I've always made sure that when I'm out at events, I can still create because then I can still speak to the managers, the editors, the creators that are within my team. I can still speak to them on the same level because I have an understanding of how long it's going to take to edit a piece, how long it's going to take to create a certain graphic, because I can also do it. And then it's also a good fallback in case, I mean, you know this very well. These events, these Olympics, these World Championships, they are ultra marathons. They are 3 weeks, if not more, straight of working 12-hour plus days every single day. And it's grueling, it's hard work, but it's the rewards are immense. So it's also good being able to kind of have that technical know-how. And it's happened at times where people have fallen unwell or just need to take a couple hours just to kind of have grab a coffee, have a relax, and kind of just get themselves back to where they need to be. So being able to kind of swap in and provide that on the tools support, I felt has been very important, but also always connecting it to the strategy. So I did 11 years of world sailing, worked at 5 Olympics, a couple Paralympics, before I moved into Motorsport UK, where I was director of marketing communications and also covered public affairs. And again, that was a very sort of strategic role, covering all of those top three items with social media included within the content. We launched a TV platform as well. And again, trying to connect what you do from a sort of Marcom's content perspective to the overarching business objective. And that was a brilliant journey. We delivered the Grand Prix year in, year out at Silverstone, other events such as Formula E, European Rally Championship, and so forth. So, a really wide ranging sport. And then I left Motorsport UK and founded Born 23, which is my own agency specializing in marketing, communications, and content, driving impact, shaping connections, always connecting business objectives and business strategy to what you're doing across marketing, communications, and content. The people and organizations I've spoken to, what I've found is that they've through the years, they've focused so much on social growth, creating content that in many respects it's almost lost its way. It's almost kind of become this beast that no longer kind of serves its true purpose for why they created it. And boards of directors are more switched on nowadays, and they're questioning, why are we doing this? Why are we spending so much money? What's the return of investment on creating so much material on social media? You're looking at governing bodies and all sports are putting major investment into these platforms. So it's about supporting them and finding out ways in which you can use this audience that they've built, but seek to then generate a return for the sport, whether that's more people participating, whether that's ticket sales, whatever it might be, but just using it for something with greater meaning than a vanity metric. So it's been a 18-year career. It's been wide ranging and varied, but I wouldn't swap it for anything in the world.
Quite the journey, and it's very interesting to hear all your your thoughts and all your, because I can see myself or feel myself, my own experience also in a lot of things that you are saying. So it's really interesting, and we'll get back to a lot of these things during this conversation. But I wanted to get back to world sailing because myself, I don't have really, like I said, a personal relationship to sailing, but also looking at those years you were working in that world, it also feels like during those years it's when social media went from a side note on the communications department to being its own thing, being its own, that you have your own, you have to have the social media strategy, you have to maybe even have a full social media department. How did that journey in social media look in an international federation?
So when I joined World Sailing in January 2011, as I mentioned earlier on, I understood social media and understood its value. And one of the first jobs I did was to look at what all of the international federations were doing on social media with regards to their followers, the way in which they were using it. And I created a spreadsheet at the time that basically tracked every single summer international federation with their total followings. There was some, and I kept that going up until about 2019, I think. And it's a really interesting bit of data because you can see spikes of when people started taking it more seriously. And there are a few sort of anomalies in there as well, where there was a period of time where buying followers was a thing, and you can see some sort of unnatural spikes across some of the federations, and then dips thereafter, which kind of explains to me that yes, perhaps some of them did buy, which is each to their own. You're right. Over that 11-year period, Instagram, when I first joined Instagram, wasn't necessarily a thing yet. And then we created one in 2014. But my early sort of tenure was very much focused on explaining to the organization how important social media was and how important it was going to be. There were multiple Facebook accounts within the organization, of which I took control of all of them. I shut one down, and then we just focused everything through the one Facebook account. We were on Twitter as well, and that essentially was it. As we started building up to London 2012, there became, a lot more requirements for immediacy in your reporting and the stories that you were telling. And we were seeing that with the audiences that we were building. And then we really used the London 2012 games to provide aspirational content that could seek to help us grow our fan base. And we successfully did it. We had huge followings at the time, and we had people engaging with us in the right way. And we also complemented that with, live blogging was massive at the time. I can't remember the piece of tech that we used. It might have been Scribble. I think it could have been something called Scribble. And we connected all of the social media accounts into it and so forth. And that at the time, just kind of, when you look back at it, it's a bit weak now. But at the time, it was kind of like, oh, this is revolutionary for the way people were following us and engaging with us. But it was working. As the years went by, I would say the real sort of turning point, sort of for me, came 2013, 2014, where there was a greater need to really dial in on your social strategy, because you could start to see the boom was up and running already. But sports became wiser to the fact that they could really connect to new people, to existing audiences, and grow a community. So strategy was super important back then, and then that enabled us to build the Instagram account. We launched that strategically ahead of the 2014 World Championships. So we had a key moment in time where we were able to populate it with the right materials, to grow the audience, which we did. And then I would say another turning point was 15, 16, where video became even more important across the platforms. From a world sailing perspective, we brought in video editors in-house, so we were able to produce regular materials. And sailing was one of those sports where, at the time when I was there was about 113 different categories of boat. Each one of them was entitled to their own world championships. They could run their own events nationwide. And you're talking about boats that are, radio control boats that were no more than a meter to 60-foot, 100-foot yachts. It's such a diverse sport, but the large majority of them were producing content. There was specialist sailing crews that are out there, and we had access to that. So we were able to showcase the diversity of the sport, not just in the Olympic world, but within the junior categories that fed up to the games, to the real recreational side of the game, of the sport, where people just do it for love and for passion. And that enabled us to kind of diversify our materials, show the sport in its many lights, but then also provide greater value for the boats affiliated to the organization, because they spent money on their membership, and it was always good for them to see that value. Along the way, you had the 2016 Olympics and 2020 Olympics. There was always ways in which, when it came to the games, there were always restrictions in what you could do. But I would say, world sailing, we were quite innovative in looking at the rules and then finding ways to get around the rules. I'll give you a few examples. Rio 2016, you can't necessarily film on site, which is fine. We understand that, but we built relationships with all of our athletes, so we were able to take them off site, literally just around the corner, interview them, create materials with them, and then push the materials out, almost immediately, within a couple of hours since they'd achieved a medal or something like that. Then there were no rules at the time to say that you couldn't produce sequential imagery, to almost create videos. So that was something that we did, of key moments that the photographers captured. Funnily enough, that then got written into the games time rules for international federations for the next games. So I kind of loosely take responsibility for that one. And then also animation. Had a really talented After Effects artist, content producer with us out in Rio, and we would animate the still images. It's almost like AI, what AI does today, but we'd animate the still images to kind of tell our story and provide, unique materials, that our audience wanted to see, on our platforms. When it came to Tokyo 2020, COVID games were a little bit more restricted in what we could do. But again, we worked so closely with the athletes and we knew them so well that they were able to send us content, send us materials, and we put a huge emphasis in that games on fan user generated content. And there's a really lovely video that really kind of springs to mind. It was a young Australian girl called Lottie, and she was a big fan of Anne-Marie Rindham, who won gold, I believe, in the women's one-person dinghy. And we got her mum to film her watching the race. We got her, to celebrate. She had a picture of when Anne-Marie was in Australia and met her. And it was a really kind of fun piece of content. And then we got Anne-Marie to send her a personalized message. Anne-Marie sent the personalized message, thank you for the support, etc. And then the mum filmed Lottie, watching that back. And that was a really kind of, it's a nice way to kind of get around the rules that you have in the games time, but B, it was also an aspirational piece of content, because that's what it's all about. It's inspiring the next generation, and that was something that performed incredibly well. But dialing back to the original question, strategy in social and content is more important now than ever. Before you post anything, before I've done anything with any clients, even though they've asked me just to crack on in some respects, I cannot do that because I need to know what you want to achieve, what are your objectives, and build the strategy for them so that we have a clear vision, a clear line of sight to what we want to achieve.
And it's really fascinating with, Olympics. I've been working a few World Cups, but Olympics is a different beast, as you mentioned, with all the restrictions and everything. You have to be, like you mentioned now, you have to be creative in a different way instead, not just like the creative output, but instead be creative in what you can actually publish. The thing you mentioned now with, strategy. So my question is, why do you think so many sports organizations or teams or clubs still treat content as just output and not instead see it as a strategic asset?
I think teams, clubs, federations, and so forth, they've kind of got themselves into a place where they feel as if they have to feed the beast, if you will. They've been doing it for so long, producing materials, hoping something sticks, in order to obtain a result that they don't know is good or not. Perhaps they feel there's an expectation on their audience that they want to see something immediately, or they want to see something behind the scenes at the right time. Um, and you've really got to get out of that. You've really kind of got to take a step back. And I feel some of the more mature organizations in this space are starting to see that. And I think in some respects, it's also very much board led. Boards of directors nowadays, in comparison to 15 years ago, that they understand social media and they're questioning social media and the executive team's usage of social media more so than ever before. So there's some orgs that are taking that shift to take a step back, have a big think about what the purpose is behind it, to be able to strategize and move forward. But that said, there are still some bodies out there that will, keep doing content for content's sake. But, there could well be a time where they themselves are also in that same position, where they've got to take a step back to really take a step forward.
When you've been working with the Motorsport UK, for me, motorsport is like I have very little, not interest, but I haven't really get into it like ever really. So for me, when I see motorsport, it's hard to me to see like what the content is. How do you really create good content or create like creative content? Because I'm mostly in other sports. So what did you learn during your time with Motorsport UK in terms of social media or content wise?
There's a lot of learnings from motorsport, and I feel as if the Olympic world and the motorsport world could learn a lot from each other. There are things in motorsport that I think the Olympic world could be doing, and then there's things in the Olympic world that I think motorsport could be doing. They're both very good in their respective areas. What I saw in motorsport, certainly from a top level, was high affinity to multiple drivers and multiple teams. It's not a sport that's necessarily like football, for example, where you're a one club person, and that's it. You can't change your mind. People will be around a British Grand Prix paddock with a McLaren t-shirt, a Ferrari jumper, and a Mercedes baseball hat. I was on taking one of Motorsport UK's VIPs on a garage tour, and one of their guests was in the Ferrari garage wearing a Ferrari hat, And then when we went into the McLaren garage, she was wearing a McLaren hat. So I'm like, hang on a minute, like what's going on here? Like, where's your affinity? But that's actually the beauty of the sport, because there is no, like, people just love it, and they love multiple teams and multiple drivers, which in turn leads well into the sort of the engagement of the content from across teams and across drivers, but then also the way in which, people are creating materials. I alluded to this earlier on about, some of the creators in the sort of domestic paddock, but there are so many different creators within the F1 space that, just find a way of connecting with fans in motorsport, and more particular Formula One, much better than some of the teams and Formula One can do themselves with regards to the content. They make it feel human. They kind of bring athletes, well, they bring the drivers into their space. They have fun with what they're doing, and it's a really kind of, it's a safe space to tell different stories and to kind of give different sides of the sport. Motorsport is so diverse and varied in its offering. You've got circuit racing, rally, karting, and then you've got people zipping in and out of cones in a supermarket car park on a Sunday morning. There's so much to it, but then there's so many opportunities for materials to be produced. And what I found worked really well during my period there is almost aligned with what I said at the top. One of my three favorite pieces of content, or favorite sort of strands of content from an educational standpoint. People want to get better, those who compete. They want to learn, how to hit certain points of a certain circuit, to get faster each lap by lap. Then when it comes to that aspirational side, people want to see things that, show humans behind the drivers. And I'll give you a piece of content that worked really well at Motorsport UK. So we were at Goodwood Festival of Speed, and Nigel Mansell's son had, I think it was race number 87 as his license number. Now that's Oliver Behrman's race number. So Nigel and his son agreed to give Ollie, because higher end drivers are able to kind of have personalized numbers on their licenses. So Nigel and his son gave Ollie 87, and the scheduling, they were both at Goodwood, and the scheduling meant that we couldn't actually get them together because one was going to his car to go up the hill, the other was going up the hill and going back into the paddock. So there was never a moment in time where they were together in the same area. But we managed to, do a sort of ceremonial handover between Nigel telling a story of the number, Ollie receiving it, saying thank you. And that's the sort of thing that really connected with not just our audience, but also with Ollie's audience, with the Haas audience, with people who absolutely adore Nigel Mansell. And it was a real kind of friendly piece that people wanted to see. And there's all sorts of, again, from a Motorsport UK perspective, when we've had opportunities to work with F1 drivers, we never spoke about competition because that's taken care of. Formula One will talk about that, their team will talk about that, the press will talk about that. What we always wanted to talk about was to find out their journey in the sport, their purpose, their reason behind doing what they're doing, why they love it, because they're always the ones that, that people aspire to, that people want to kind of connect with. And then the last element, again, as I alluded to at the top, is creative. I feel as if motorsport is one of those sports where there are key moments, get the materials out there. Working with a club in motorsport at the moment, and I was doing some filming, and one of the drivers almost lost the back end, managed to, do a bit of a Tokyo drift style skid along one of the straights, but I captured it and I pushed it out, and it performed really well. And that's because you're showing the previously unseen and putting it out into the public domain. So those sort of three strands, again, they work quite well in motorsport right now.
Now, today, you have started your own company, Born 23. So, what was your vision behind starting this journey?
I had the dream probably about 3 years ago where I wanted to go out on my own. The very notebook I've got in front of me, has the dates of when I first started scribbling things down, and what it might look like. I remember I was sat having an interview with a governing body, and I was interviewed by about 15 people that day. And I just sort of said to myself, I don't think I want to do this anymore. I think now's the time for me to, you know, make this break and go at it on my own. And that's what I did. I spent the back end of 2025, figuring out what am I going to call this. That was one of the hardest challenges, figuring out a name. I didn't want I'm a person that likes to have meaning and purpose behind everything. I could have called myself, super sports, or big sports marketing, or whatever it might be, but that's just not me. But Born 23 was a name that has meaning in the sense of, so my first ice hockey number, which is a sport I played and actually have started playing again, that was my first ever number. Both of my children were born on the 23rd of their respective months. And I liked the notion of born to be free. It's just something along those lines that kind of resonated. So then I've managed to bring that down into Born 23, or you can say Born to Free. And that's where it came from. I spent done some sort of small projects at the back end of last year, and then really started ramping it up in January of this year. I managed to onboard clients across motorsport, across sailing, across ice hockey, international federations as well, that I'll announce soon. So lots of good quality clients and good in sports that I'm absolutely passionate about and love. And it's going in the right direction.
When you started your company, or when you see the future, did you have was there any problems or any, areas that you saw in like the sports content world or the sports communications world that you wanted to aim to solve for the companies or the teams that you wanted to work with that aren't being solved today?
Yeah, one of the sort of alluded it through our conversation. It's the connection of what they're doing to the overall business objectives. What do you want to achieve as a sport? Is that to achieve higher ticket sales? Is it to build deeper, richer communities? Is it to bring in more members? Working with bodies to, first of all, understand what do they actually want to achieve, and how is that going to support the growth of the organization at large? And that's sort of where I've kind of really sort of positioned myself, and then working with them on the strategy to essentially get there. And that comes in the shape and form of looking at the insights, looking at the data, trying to enable people to understand that an audience on, the Meta platforms, for example, you don't necessarily own any of that data. So how can we find ways in which you can bring in that first party data and start to understand more about your community, more about your audience? This is something that I'm certainly pushing within the motorsport area, because if you're, as a driver, with a fan base of 50,000, yes, it's quite nice as one metric, but for a sponsor, you don't know anything about them. So I'm encouraging people at the moment to really think about your first party data and then using that to support your commercial sales or pitching or so forth. Because the way I see it, if you've got 1,000 engaged people who do who do things that you want them to do, whether that's buy your merchandise or engage with your partner, then that potentially has greater value than an audience of 100,000 people on social media who just only see you at a glance when they're scrolling through. So for me, as I say, strategy, connection to the business objectives at large, and really focusing on the why you're doing things and then building thereafter.
Two things I think about when you're talking about this. Do you feel like is there something when you see like sports content or content overall, what separates content that just performs from content that actually builds a brand?
One of the clients I have in sailing, we work together quite closely, and we kind of came up with this little phrase. It's like, play on the trend, but not the gimmick. There are trends almost on a daily basis where something's out there and everybody's jumping on it. If you're jumping on every trend, you're not really building a brand, you're building a gimmick because you're just playing on things. I feel certainly within the content space, you need to identify the right content, the right themes, and the right categories so that when those trends do arise, you're able to capitalize on them, but whilst at the same time ensuring you've not strayed away from what your organizational story is. And that's something that has generated both twofold, both performance of the content. This is out of event season, but the materials are regularly hitting six-figure views, which is pretty much unheard of when this one particular event in question is 6 months away. So that kind of lends well to what I just said, focusing on the trend, but focusing on the story alongside it, but avoiding that whole gimmick of what some content can do. And as you're building the brand and you're building the audience around it, that's where you can sort of solidify your story with materials that are connected to that existing audience that they want to see. The behind the scenes, the stories that really matter, and the insight that really matters to that owned audience. I would never suggest to anyone to create or post content for content's sake. And the amount of like not arguments but little bickers that I've had with people because something just doesn't make sense to post. But it's important that you educate and you support people by explaining why something might not be a good idea, because it is detrimental to the brand, but then it's also detrimental to the performance of your content.
My second thought was you mentioned a lot about, the data, the strategy, measure, you can actually measure stuff. So what do you think should sport organizations, how can you actually measure the success of their content?
You've got the vanity metrics, shall we say, of views, reach, engagement rate. They're important factors, but I think the way in which people should measure is, what are you getting your audience to do? Are you getting them to do something that supports your organizational objective? Is a piece of content driving someone to sign up for a taster session of a particular sport? Is a piece of content driving people to purchase a ticket for an upcoming event? That's where I feel stronger organizations at the moment are really dialed in the knowing that having access to your social audience can subsequently drive bums on seats. It can drive the bottom line. And that can be measured in so many different ways, as I alluded to: the ticket sales, the memberships, the merchandise that's purchased online. whatever it may be. So as long as you know what your kind of key focal point is and you dial in on that, then that for me is probably more important than achieving big viewership and big reach. That does help, but knowing what you want to do with them and where you want to send them to achieve that sort of, that hit on the bottom line, that's the most important thing.
If you are a creator today who wants to, take the step towards maybe more a managing position or actually founding your own company like you have done, I asked you to bring your top 3 tips for someone taking the same route as you have done. So how do you go from just, being in a position of creating or working for someone else to actually build your own thing?
Yeah, I've learned an awful lot about business setting up on my own, and I would say the 3 things I'd suggest is get a good backbone to the business. This comes in the shape of have a good accountant, have good legal support, but also having good mentors, good advisors, people who you can sort of bounce ideas off, and they're going to tell you if they think something's good or something's rubbish. That helps you move faster because you're not bogged down in the details of a contract or an agreement or whatever it might be, because that can really slow you down and move you away from what you're essentially good at, which is working with people, which is creating, which is strategizing. Enjoy the chase. One of the things I've really, really enjoyed is speaking to so many different organizations, speaking to a wide variety of people, and understanding their issues and understanding areas where I can help. There's no better feeling than getting a call or getting an email from someone to say, "Yeah, we'd love to work with you on this project." And I've always been the other side of that. Um, I've never been chasing that, but it is one of the best feelings I've had in the workplace because you work hard through your proposal, for the development, and it's such a good buzz, to be honest. So you've got to make sure you enjoy that and you've got to work hard for it. Certainly when you're very, very small, because it's not easy and you've got to really, really graft. The final one is trust, building trust with people. That is incredibly important. It takes weeks, months, years to build trust with someone. You can lose that overnight through one issue. So build trust with your clients. What I've quickly found in some respects is that some clients are very happy to kind of let me get on with managing their channels, which is one part daunting, because you're kind of out there on your own, hoping that what you're doing they like, which I'm very fortunate that they do. But the second part is actually really exciting because you're not bound by there are no limits, essentially. If you feel as if a certain piece of content could connect and resonate with their audience, and you have the insight to back that up, then I've been able to go for it. And one of my sort of personal favorite pieces of work I've done most recently, and it's very, very small in terms of its viewership, but is with England ice hockey. So I've taken them, Born 23, I've taken them on as a client, and throughout the years, their usage of video on their platforms has been incredibly limited. That's something that, Instagram is a video first platform nowadays, and it just wasn't using video at all. So literally overnight, I changed that, brought video in immediately with the sort of personal goal of, having their best performing piece of content ever. And within, I think it was less than 2 weeks, I managed to achieve that with one video of a youth hockey player at a tournament doing a penalty shootout skills competition. again, we're not talking about big audiences. They've got 12,000, 12,500 on their Instagram, 20,000 on their Facebook. But that piece achieved, 50,000 views, which was a record. But then I also think about, well, what's the purpose behind that as well? It's a good vanity metric, but then there's also other hidden metrics within that. So this player, for example, his Elite Prospects, which is the scouting website for the sport, it went up from having pretty much 0 views to having over 100 views during the period of that content was kind of really accelerating. So athlete awareness of a young player who's, going to make it in the sport in some way, shape, or form, it just built his profile to a potential new audience literally overnight. Because I had the trust from the organization to be able to, create those types of materials and know that the audience wanted to see content such as that, it's enabled me to, go out and create and deliver. And now almost every video that that we push out from events is achieving good viewership, good numbers, but then it's also doing other things such as it drove ticket sales for 2 big events recently. It drove live stream purchases as well, just because we rethought the way in which we're packaging something.
Great advice, and thank you for sharing them. You mentioned in the beginning of this conversation that you were excited for what awaits ahead. So my question is, what excites you about, the future of the sports content industry and, the coming 3, 4, 5 years in this scene of sports?
What excites me is the organizations that are really dialing in on their strategy behind it. I'm seeing shifts of people becoming, at a board level, becoming more educated on social media, understanding its purpose, and then also questioning its purpose, which I think in turn makes organizations respect and understand the importance of it more than ever before. That's the bit that really excites me, and being able to find the right strategy, nail the right strategy to grow communities both across social platforms through the materials you create, but also to grow owned audiences through, first party data capture and being able to super serve them with materials that are relevant to them, that's supporting the organizational objectives. That's the thing that's, really getting me excited about my personal journey, but also the industry as well. And then on a personal level, there's no, as I alluded to, there's no sort of better feeling than, getting that buzz of getting that nod that you've got a new client, having put the work in, seeing results and generating results for people is such a good feeling. And then also the diversity of it and being able to grow something that's my own it's super exciting, and it's a fabulous place to be. And I'm very honored. If I'm being honest, I'm very honored to be able to work in this space, and because there are thousands of other people that want to be in similar positions. So never taking anything for granted.
Nice. It's been amazing talking to you today, Daniel. I learned from you. It's been really eye-opening on a lot of levels, I feel. The last question that I always ask my guests here is, do you have any creator or anyone working in the sports content field or the sports communication scene that you would like to hear on this podcast?
I think there's two. One of them is a motorsport competitor in the UK called Dan Hickey. Dan has driven in GB4, which is a single-seater series in the UK, but he's managed to grow a huge owned audience of about 300,000 followers across all of his platforms. And he's just found perfect way to connect to audiences with the materials that he's producing. And that fan base is one of the biggest in the sort of domestic motorsport scene. So his story and how he's really kind of honed in on high quality content with a bit of fun behind it is something that would be brilliant to explore. And then secondly, I alluded to some of the creators within the F1 paddock as well, and there's loads out there. But one of them that kind of does sort of spring to mind is Bella James. Followed her quite a bit over the years, and she's become very sort of personable and relatable to a lot of the competitors, which again is something I alluded to earlier on in our conversation. And those would be my two recommendations.
Thank you so much, Daniel, for today. I really appreciated this conversation.
Thank you very much. It was great to be on, Isaac.